Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're cutting straight through that classic alpine fairy tale of Switzerland's untouchable borders to examine the true cost of neutrality. Because, when you look past the quiet political declarations and those gorgeous picturesque landscapes, what you actually find is a masterclass in calculated strategic defense. It's the reason this nation has remained unconquered for centuries, even while totally surrounded by incredibly powerful and often warring neighbors.
So how exactly did a nation right at the chaotic crossroads of European conflict pull off this incredible feat? We kind of just treat Switzerland's reputation for neutrality as the whole answer, right? Like simply declaring yourself neutral is some sort of magic force field. But let's be real, a piece of paper, a treaty, or a promise, that has rarely been enough to stop an advancing tank column. History tells a much richer and, honestly, a much more intense story. Neutrality here wasn't just some inherent trait or a stroke of pure luck. It was a highly engineered outcome. There's a massive hidden cost to this kind of absolute safety, and it requires a level of readiness and cold calculation that really forces us to rethink what neutrality actually means in the real world.
We all sort of universally accept this myth, don't we? The idea of a naturally peaceful utopia that just magically avoids conflict. But peel back that layer, and you reveal a heavily militarized, hyper-calculated reality underneath. As the evidence builds, the Swiss story becomes less about a passive nation politely stepping aside and way more about a nation purposefully making conflict extremely unattractive. They didn't just cross their fingers and hope for peace. They literally engineered a scenario where invading them became an unimaginably expensive logistical nightmare for anyone who even dared to run the numbers. It's the ultimate form of deterrence. And to really grasp it, we have to look closely at the massive systemic costs they willingly took on to make that deterrence credible. Let's start by looking at the first big piece of the puzzle, the infrastructure cost. When we break down the true cost of this neutrality, we absolutely have to start with their physical geography. Because look, this wasn't just beautiful scenery, it was a fully engineered fortress. The mountains aren't just natural borders, they're the foundation of a massive nationwide defense project. We're not just talking about steep hills being hard to climb. We are talking about a nation that took its rugged geography and systematically weaponized it. They bored carefully engineered tunnels deep into solid rock, creating these vast subterranean networks that could house troops, supplies, and command centers indefinitely. They transformed ordinary, sleepy-looking valleys into hidden, interlocking fortresses with overlapping fields of fire. And perhaps the wildest part? They designed an infrastructure where every critical bridge, every tunnel entrance, and every major road was rigged to disappear at a moment's notice. It's a literal nightmare for an invading force. Imagine trying to supply a mechanized army only to find the road ahead blown to dust by the very people who built it. Throughout history, major powers would look at this layered defense, run the numbers, and quickly conclude that the costs of navigating these overwhelming obstacles far, far outweighed any conceivable reward. It was a mathematical deterrent carved directly into stone. Just put yourself in the shoes of a military planner for a second, staring down at a topographical map of the Alps. Ask yourself, if you were authorizing an attack, would you target a country where your supply lines could be severed instantly just because every bridge vanished? Where a quiet valley could suddenly erupt into a fortified stronghold? Where every single citizen was prepared to actively defend their home? The sheer logistical terror of trying to move an army through a country that is actively, intentionally collapsing its own infrastructure just to stop you dead in your tracks? Well, that's precisely why the gamble was never taken. But infrastructure is only half of the battle. Now we need to talk about the human cost. Because obviously all those hidden tunnels and rigged bridges are completely useless without the people trained and willing to trigger them. And this brings us to the human requirement that powers this massive deterrent, the concept of the citizen soldier. For the Swiss, military readiness mattered just as much, if not more, than their political declarations. The citizen soldier is a system ensuring the entire population serves as an active, standing deterrent. We aren't talking about a small professional army stationed at the border. This meant that every civilian was military ready, literally keeping their gear at home, prepared to defend their homeland at a moment's notice. So when our hypothetical military planner looks at Switzerland, this totally flips the calculus of an invasion. You weren't just fighting a conventional military force that you can outflank or outnumber, you're fighting the entire society. You're fighting every citizen in every valley, every mountain pass, and every city block. The true cost of this neutrality is the profound psychological and societal commitment required by the whole population. The peace they enjoy is quite literally paid for by a permanent collective state of absolute readiness.
Which brings us to a more complex layer, the moral and reputation cost.
See, the true cost to maintain this untouchable status wasn't just physical engineering or military readiness. Digging deeper into the historical record reveals it also involved a highly complex and sometimes really uncomfortable global influence. Looking at the evidence impartially, we have to examine the critics' arguments that Switzerland's security was deeply tied to economic value and financial influence. Critics correctly point out that beyond the mountains and militias, Switzerland engineered a totally different type of shield. They made themselves indispensable. Their strategy involved highly calculated international diplomacy, setting themselves up as a necessary neutral ground for negotiations and, famously, participating in controversial wartime banking. By protecting assets and facilitating transactions across dividing lines, they built a financial interdependency that acted as its own powerful deterrent. You know, myths are rarely the whole truth, and both sides of this history deserve careful examination. Their safety was definitely fortified by geography, sure, but it was also fortified by being financially useful, sometimes to all sides of a conflict. That is a heavy moral and reputational cost to bear. Yet, impartially speaking, it was undeniably a core component of their broadest strategy, making their nations simply too valuable, both financially and diplomatically, for anyone to want to destroy.
So, when you tie every single piece together, the real explanation for their centuries of safety becomes crystal clear. It's simply that they layered these intense costs together to make conflict an overwhelmingly bad investment. It was never just one thing. It was the geographic and engineered fortresses, combined with the absolute, uncompromising readiness of the citizen soldier, all layered on top of massive financial and diplomatic stakes. This fundamentally changes how we should think about Swiss neutrality. It wasn't some passive state of just hoping for peace. It was an incredibly active, highly funded, fiercely maintained, and deeply integrated system of layered deterrence. Take away any one of these pillars, the rigged bridges, the armed populace, or the financial utility, and that famous shield of neutrality crumbles. So, I'll leave you with this final thought to ponder regarding the true definition of neutrality and what it actually takes to survive untouched in a hostile world. Does true neutrality alone, just the word, the treaty, and the promise, actually keep a nation safe? Or does history show us that overwhelming military readiness, intentionally engineered geography, and cold, strategic deterrence are the real prerequisites for survival? That, ultimately, might be the true cost of peace. Thanks for joining this explainer.